Welcome to this installment of the WebAge Speaks webinar series. And in this installment, we're going to be talking about the connection between the DevOps movement and Agile software development. There we go. My name is Brad Brown. I am a WebAge instructor and an independent consultant. Many of the people that WebAge employs to deliver course material are people who are actually practitioners in the field. So these are things that we do every day. My practice revolves largely around solution architecture and software development productivity, of which DevOps and Agile software development are key components. WebAge Solutions provides comprehensive training for a large number of different areas, including architecture, DevOps, Agile practices, many other areas as well. I'd invite you to look at the website later for specific needs, and I've got some pointers at the end of the presentation for specific product lines, offering lines. And in this talk, what we're going to be looking at is what is the nature of the connection between DevOps and Agile software development. We'll have a brief overview of Agile, largely purposes and a little bit of methodologies, and a similar overview of DevOps, and that should give us the background to draw the connection between these two sets of practices. And then we'll look at how we actually get, as an organization, how we get the most out of both of these practices. There are differences between Agile and DevOps, and some considerations that are important for their coexistence. But in general, there are many more similarities and points of leverage than there are actual differences. So we'll start by looking at the connection between, whether there is a connection between DevOps and Agile. So what do we mean by Agile? Well, Agile in this context is a set of approaches to managing software development. There are many different approaches. I'm using the term Agile to refer to an umbrella of different practices. There are very specific methodologies, all of which share some characteristics. The emphasis of these methodologies tends to be around iterative, incremental, and evolutionary software development. And they all share a common aim. The aim is to be able to deliver better software faster and to deliver better software faster. And Agile methodologies promote the use of software methodologies that support these Agile values. And again, there are many methods. People will be familiar with things like Scrum and extreme programming. And there are methodologies that are a little bit broader than that. The dynamic systems development method is not necessarily focused on software development per se, but brings into an Agile environment a lot of the necessary project control things that people like PMs are typically concerned about, but in a very positive way for development of large-scale, complex systems, of which software often is. The Agile movement has been around for some time. It was started by a small group of people, now called the Agile Alliance, in the early 2000s. Their observation was, these are very experienced software development practitioners, and their observation was that traditional software development practices, largely around waterfall methodologies or some variants of that, tended to fail, particularly when they were in the context of very large projects, which is kind of interesting since Agile has emerged as a very, very common practice for small and nimble projects as well. But this Agile Alliance identified a set of core values that they built into the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, which is a set of values and practices that Agile methods are, in general, adapt. This Agile thinking has continued to evolve into a very large number of different practices with specific names and specific methodologies. And depending on what your particular predilection is, what your practice is, and the environment in your organization, one or more of these methods might be particularly applicable to you. But in all cases, there are some significant benefits to Agile methodologies. And I'm going to leave the revenue one to last for just a moment. But the benefits of adopting an Agile methodology for software development include speed to market. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that I can take a project that used to take a year and deliver it in 6 months. But what it does mean is if I apply an Agile approach to the project that would have taken a year, I get some tangible, probably usable, from a customer point of view, results much, much faster than a year, and then evolve toward that end product. So being able to deliver into market, being able to deliver actual value quickly, is one of the key benefits of Agile. I do this without sacrificing quality, because the Agile methodology gives me mechanisms for managing quality that typically result in higher quality product, largely because I'm discovering issues and managing them as I go, rather than kind of making this naive assumption that I can understand the entire problem before I even start. I also get much greater visibility into what's going on throughout the development process, because I have all these interim steps, intermediate steps, where I'm actually getting tangible results, and I can look at them and I can understand what the state of software development is, and the state of my team's understanding of the problem, kind of where the issues are and where they aren't, which leads to a much better ability to manage risk overall. One might assume that the flexibility inherent to Agile methodologies would be a source of risk, but it's actually exactly the opposite. It's actually a mechanism for decreasing risk, and consequently, or as well, increasing flexibility. A much better ability to be flexible in what I'm actually going to deliver and do if I'm delivering some intermediate steps along the way and kind of evaluating what I'm doing as I go along, which also gives me the ability to have more points where I can have cost control. Okay? It's much more difficult to understand what the implications of decisions are when I make them all up front and then hope that I've got them right. Whereas in an agile environment, I can actually make choices as I go, make decisions as I go about where to invest and what are appropriate points of investment. Throughout this process, one of the central tenets of agile methodologies is key involvement of key stakeholders, and particularly business. In an ideal world, I actually have a business person as an active member of the development team throughout the process. In the real world, this seldom happens, but I have the opportunity to have a much greater level of business engagement, again, because of this iterative approach and because I'm producing value in multiple stages. All of these aspects together make sure that I'm actually developing the right product, or at least they have a much higher chance of building the right product. And these kind of very tangible things lead to, generally, a much more positive work experience for everybody involved, and generally higher revenue for the organization, simply because I'm building the right thing with higher quality, with earlier delivery. Now, these agile methodologies, they look a little bit different, but they all share some common characteristics in how they kind of look and feel. This is one graphic that describes kind of generally agile software development, and I don't want to dwell on the details very much, but I do want to emphasize a few points around this. You'll notice that this is a continuous cycle, that I'm performing some operations, some development activities. At multiple points, I'm doing integration and testing throughout the development of a particular cycle or a sprint. So I have multiple points to actually discover and deal with issues, probably way more than the 3 illustrated here. That's just kind of space limitation. And I explicitly build into the process review and feedback processes so that I'm gathering information from stakeholders, I'm gathering information from potential users, and making good decisions about whether the thing that I've built in this sprint, which is relatively short, generally a few weeks, is something that is the right thing. And at some times, I might actually make decisions to release the results of a sprint to market. So I might be releasing a product which I intend to be maybe a multi-month project in phases where I'm actually making a release into market every 2, 3, 4 weeks. Again, dramatically different than kind of large-scale classic waterfall development. And other things that are key to this methodology are that I'm taking the time to record and incorporate changes, to adjust my plans and my objectives and track decisions, and then actually plan the next iteration. So one of the 2 kind of key features of this that should be readily apparent is there are multiple, many points at which I'm actually testing the overall product, so I detect issues early. And in contrast to what some people might think of agile development as semi-organized, just kind of running ahead and doing things quickly, I'm actually very, very deliberate in evaluating what's going on, evaluating what I'm doing, making decisions, and keeping track of the project overall. Agile development has methodologies have emerged into a very mature and very well tested and extremely valuable set of practices for doing software development very effectively. Now, a more recent trend is the trend towards DevOps. And DevOps is a combination of activities between development and operations. DevOps originally started as a movement to apply some of the techniques that were being used in Agile software development to the operations environment, has emerged over time into a set of practices that are really all about collaboration between development and operations teams. And this set of activities, this collaboration, isn't just at the tail end around the release, it's actually throughout all stages of the software lifecycle. Essentially, what's going on in DevOps is we are trying to extend the idea of automation and process throughout both software development and into the change configuration and release process as well. The concept emerged relatively recently. It emerged out of an Agile conference in 2008. The term DevOps actually emerged as the title of a conference in 2009, DevOps Days Conference. And in just a couple of years, the DevOps movement and momentum was moving forward very quickly, particularly with the development of both literature on practice and how people can approach DevOps, and also tools. Tools such as, for example, Vagrant. So Vagrant is an open source product that is used to rapidly develop, create, and manage development and build environments. So that I can, as a developer, I can rapidly create and then throw away when I don't need them anymore, environments for building software, for doing testing, for doing production testing, all the different activities that I do. And the theme here is the things that we're doing, the kind of activities we perform in an Agile environment are similar to the things that we're bringing those practices into the operations environment as well. And this has been so successful that in the last few years, major enterprises are starting to embrace the idea of DevOps. Now, why? Because there are a number of benefits, both technical and business. The technical, simply looking at kind of how this affects my delivery process. Out of DevOps, I tend to get a much better continuous software delivery. Continuous software delivery is the idea that I can deliver changes to software rapidly with low barriers to there's low impedance, very few impediments to delivering software. So just like Agile has practices like continuous integration, where I'm automating a lot of the integration and test activities so that I have this continuously updated view of the quality of my software. Well, here I'm doing the same thing through software delivery. I have the ability to automate the software delivery so that I can. There's really no barrier to actually going out and making a deployment, to delivering software. It would seem that this makes things more complicated, but it actually turns out that the environment then becomes less complex. The problems that we face are much less complex. And they're less complex simply because we're dealing with them in much smaller chunks and much more iteratively. And then we also have the opportunity to leverage a lot of automation so that when we find a problem, we solve it once. And then it becomes part of the automation scripts that we've built, and so we don't have to run into that problem again. This level of automation and the low barriers to actually making change and releasing change means that we get much faster resolution of problems. So there are business benefits as well. Organizations really like this because it allows me as a business to deliver features to users faster and more reliably. It would seem that this level of change might result in an operational environment that's less stable, but again, exactly the opposite is true. The operations environment actually becomes more stable. There's more automation, there's more testing, there's more practice and control. So the overall environment is both more flexible and kind of quicker to manage and more stable as well, which means we have more time available to add value. And I spend less time fixing and maintaining things. So that simple concept of additional time available from resources is a huge benefit to businesses, allowing people to focus on real value delivery rather than, frankly, fairly uninteresting and from a business point of view, not valuable problems of fixing things. And of course, all these benefits mean generally much more satisfied and much more engaged customers. So what does this look like? Well, I don't want to go through a detail of this graphic. There are many different ways that people implement this. The essential point in this graphic is the idea that we have this continuous stream of activities that involve both development, test, and operations, supported by tools, supported by automation, to take an environment from, to take a piece of software from idea to through development, through testing, into release, and again, very few barriers to actual delivery. So it should be relatively clear that there's a relationship between the things the kinds of practices that we do in DevOps, the kind of practices that we do in Agile. Operations plays a role as the direct interface between IT and the business. The operations group is responsible for actual deployment of software and then supporting the business who is actually using the software. So they tend to be the part of the organization that, from a use of software point of view, are the ones who are accountable for the effectiveness of the use of software. At the same time, we have these agile practices that are developing software incrementally and delivering them incrementally and delivering change incrementally, which means that the incremental releases that we produce through an agile process need to be coupled with incremental deployments as well. Ultimately, we want to have this correspondence between the activities that produce some change in an agile environment, and the deployment of the kind of use of those changes in the deployment environment. So operations teams then need to be able to work incrementally along with development in the service of actual deployment. Now, this has not been, it's not this idea that we kind of work together and have practices that mesh is simple to describe. It's not something that necessarily works effectively all the time, and the evolution of software delivery has had bumps in the road. People have adopted the Agile methodology and treated it as simply a synonym for just taking the traditional waterfall methodology and making them really, really short and putting them in sequence. The methodology tends to fail because it's missing the bigger picture. It's missing the point of kind of introspection and continuous improvement and kind of continually evolving this underlying product. Similarly, operations departments have had issues with particularly agile environments where they have deployments that queue up much faster than they're able to manage. So an operations environment may be, particularly when part of the organization goes agile and they're not really ready for it, this environment where you have all these releases that are kind of backing up and people want them to push them out, and they don't have the actual capability or perhaps mindset or processes, often it's around processes, to be able to do that. So DevOps is specifically designed to address these issues, because DevOps is really all about the synchronization of development and operations tasks. It's about making sure that that the benefits we get from an agile software development process are realizable and achievable in the context of what we do in operations. And so what we're doing is we're taking this process and trying to link and shorten the connection between the aha moment in the business, where there's a need identified for some change, and the realization of the value of that change through agile development and DevOps to work together as one continuous process to be able to realize that value quickly and effectively. So how then do we get the most from both Agile and DevOps? Well, it's largely an issue of a collaboration. Okay? So we have to design processes and mindsets and attitudes of people to enable these traditionally separate areas of development and operations to work effectively together. And to do that, we want to recognize that there are what we might call complementary differences. Both organizations have goals, roles, and quality assurance objectives that are somewhat different, but can be used to complement each other effectively. So take, for example, the goals of Agile. Agile is interested in better coordination between business and development teams. It's concerned about being able to deliver more flexible and more flexible and more effective software, and to be able to deliver that software faster. And taken in isolation, these are the primary goals of an Agile practice. If we look at the goals of DevOps from the point of view, largely from an operations point of view, the goals, just looking at this as a silo, include integration of software development functions throughout the entire lifecycle, coordination between development, QA, and operations, and then decreasing development and operations costs. And it should be apparent that these goals, they are somewhat different, particularly in scope, are very much complementary. These differences in goals, or the complementary goals, are also reflected in different but complementary roles. In roles, Agile methodologies specify specific roles for individuals, and the names for these things are different depending on which particular methodology you have chosen to ascribe to. But the ideas, the concepts behind them are largely fairly similar. For example, in Scrum, we have certain definitions for roles around a Scrum Master, product owner, team, stakeholders. And these roles define what those particular individuals, the individuals who are taking those roles, are responsible for and what they do and how they interact with others. And these roles are specifically designed to enable and really enhance collaboration between business and development. The different but complementary roles in DevOps include DevOps automation engineer, release manager, integration specialist. Again, these are terms that are not universally accepted, and people will use different terms for different things. But if you look at what the roles do, they have particular activities and particular responsibilities that are all in service of making DevOps effective. And again, just as in goals, these roles for Agile and DevOps are complementary, primarily because they involve different scope. They're different activities that people are interested in the Agile roles and DevOps roles are very complementary. The focus in Agile is largely around the software development process, and the DevOps roles are largely around taking the results of that software development process and being able to realize value from it in an operational environment. And the last different but complementary set of capabilities that we'll talk about is around quality assurance. We have, in Agile, we have a desire to find and remove problems very quickly, to be able to deal with those issues quickly. We have and a whole bunch of practices to try and discover these things and deal with them, like continuous integration. We want to be able to do incremental testing, but not only just incremental testing, incremental learning. We want to be able to divide the problem up and essentially approach it as a set of incremental activities where we're gradually moving towards an understanding of the entire problem. And we aim for, I'd actually say it's a little stronger than aim for, it's kind of required, that we automate a lot of testing. Doing Agile development without a high degree of test automation is certainly possible, but it's challenging. Now, my desire in quality assurance from a DevOps point of view is to try and align the work in the DevOps cycle to make sure that the activities are in alignment with each other. It's very much to make sure that test cases can be automated so that testing can be automated as much as possible. Test environments and provisioning of test environments needs to be standardized and automated. And the activities that go on inside these test environments need to be aligned with a continuous integration cycle. So in this set of different but complementary capabilities, you see that the needs of DevOps from a QA point of view are very, very complementary to the needs of Agile QA, and particularly around the ability to provision capabilities for testing. And I will argue from kind of real world experience that automation of testing and the ability to ensure that tests are relatively complete from various practices like code coverage analysis, etc., is one of the things that really makes both Agile and DevOps successful. Lack of automated testing or lack of complete automated testing allows you to have these places where issues can creep through. And spending the time to really be very careful about the QA process and the automated testing process provides tremendous benefits that can be sometimes hard to see in the beginning. But when you've been in an environment where some of those things have been lacking and you see issues creep through that you don't detect, particularly when you're trying to move towards continuous delivery of software, testing problems are a huge barrier to the ability to do effective continuous delivery of software. So if we can sum it up, DevOps success and the leverage of both Agile and DevOps means having all the right pieces, the necessary pieces together, and working cooperatively to be able to make sure that these things leverage each other and are in an environment where you're able to succeed. Which leads to then a number of considerations that need to be accounted for the coexistence of Agile and DevOps. And we're concerned with areas including motivations, procedures or processes, and requirements. If we look at motivations, what motivations do we have to put these two practices together? Well, they actually share some very similar challenges. Agile requires teams to become much more productive. It's kind of the point of Agile. Whereas DevOps, the concern is, the challenge, is the need to build development, testing, and production environments that streamline work, that really don't present barriers to the use of these environments. Either of these things is a valuable objective on its own, but doing the two of them together really brings some exponential advantages. If I do both of these things, Agile teams that are more productive and development, test, and production environments that are where the provisioning is very highly streamlined, I can end up with a much shorter development cycle. I end up with many more opportunities to detect defects and deal with them earlier. I end up with an environment where DevOps actually supports Agile's release cycle, as opposed to Agile's release cycle being a source of backlog in the operations environment. And at the same time, Agile supports DevOps cost reduction efforts, because the things that the Agile processes do to try and automate and streamline activities feed very effectively into these same objectives in DevOps. And reducing the barriers between both of these things allows us to decrease cost, both in kind of hard dollar costs and time, opportunity cost as well. There are procedures that I would follow, or processes that I would follow to combine DevOps and Agile practices. And one of the kind of fundamental things that we want to do from a process point of view is extend the Agile feedback loop, by including operations earlier on in the process. What we mean by this is Agile is essentially built as a feedback loop where I perform a bunch of activities, the sprint, and then I have some retrospective where I look at what actually happened and use that to make decisions about what I do in the next iteration. It's kind of a loose description of the Agile feedback loop. Well, if I can extend that feedback loop to include what actually happened after I did a deployment, what actually happened in the test environments, in the load testing environments, in the actual production environment, if I go that far, and what actually happens when I present some new software feature to a customer and they provide feedback on it. Well, if I have this ability to do not just kind of a sprint, but do continuous delivery after that sprint, I can take that information and use it to feed back into the process. So the activities that are covered by this agile feedback loop are not just the software development activities, but also the production and use of the software, operations and use of the software as well. And that is a dramatic increase in essentially the power of the feedback loop. Because now we're making better decisions, more informed decisions, and informed by real world experience into what's going into the next sprints. Another process or procedure change that I want to make DevOps and Agile work effectively together are to validate environments. Essentially, each environment that I have, development environments, QA environments, production environments, I can tune to get better results. And often what this means for organizations is simply that these environments have a high degree of correspondence between them. So the environment that I'm actually doing my build and integration test in, the development environment, parts of the development environment, is structurally and maybe even from a size point of view similar to what I'm doing in QA, to what I'm doing in production. And by making sure that these environments have a high degree of correspondence, it removes one of the sources of kind of common operational issues where the environment that I developed and tested in isn't quite the same as the environment that I actually developed in. Now, I have a note from somebody, just a chat message. They've lost audio. I just want to check if can other people hear me? This may be just an individual thing. Can a couple people who can hear me just, okay, I got at least one who can hear. Can someone else kind of say, yeah, okay. Okay, Tracy, sorry, just give me just a moment. I'm going to send back a message to this one person. I lost my cursor. Okay. Yeah, I have one message from somebody who's saying the audio is going in and out a little bit. Just make a quick response here. Sorry, I keep losing my cursor. There. Okay. So just to return to the slide. So one of the practices is to make sure that the environments have a high degree of correspondence between them and they're validated. And one of the ways that we can leverage these Agile and DevOps together is by using DevOps practices around automation of provisioning in the Agile environment as well. Okay. And then the last practice that we'll talk about is the use of version control. And the kind of innovation, if you will, here around the use of version control is the extension of the use of version control from the Agile environment, where it's very common. I mean, I don't know anybody who does kind of quality modern software development without using version control, into the operations environment, where this concept of kind of versioning things is relatively new for a lot of people. And one of the ways this has been enabled is through the use of the kind of jargon term is infrastructure as code, which what it really refers to is the ability to write descriptions, code, that says what an infrastructure environment looks like and effectively execute those descriptions to cause an environment to be realized. And you could think of this, one kind of simple way of thinking about this is as scripts. So I could have a script which creates an environment. This leverages common capabilities in virtualization. But nowadays, many people are using tools that are specifically designed for this, things like Chef and Puppet, for creating textual descriptions of an infrastructure environment that are executable by the Chef or Puppet systems. that cause an environment to be realized. Now, if I can write a textual description of an environment, I can version that textual description, and that allows me to treat the infrastructure for a project as just a piece of source code, and I can keep it with the rest of the source of the application. Effectively, I'm making the infrastructure environment no different than the product of development. So there are a number of different things that we effectively need to make sure that this works. One thing is that the Agile team needs to have operations teams as members. You can't make DevOps and Agile work effectively together if you don't have people cooperating on the same team. And so the Agile team needs to have operations staff as members of the team. They may not need to be there, every day of the week, all the time, but they need to be able to be part of the overall workflow. And the same thing goes the other way. Agile should have, Ops should have people from Agile teams, from the project teams, participating in operations activities as well. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say there's just one blended team and there's kind of no distinction. Particularly in a large enterprise, this is probably overkill. But to have membership across teams certainly is necessary. Another effective requirement to make this work is to change the definition of done in Agile to include operations-related elements. The definition of done is a fundamental concept to a lot of Agile practices, in which you have a precise and relatively formal definition that says, this is how we know that we're done with a particular kind of activity. And by including operations-related activities, such as it's deployed in this environment, or it's gone to this place, it's gone through all its testing, whatever kind of operational deployment objective you choose to have, including that in definition of done, from an Agile point of view, means that the Agile team, the software development team, isn't off the hook until those things are complete. And when you have people who practice Agile methodologies and have practiced the mindset for a long time, this is a very, very important concept. The importance of the definition of done is fundamental to how people think about, how mature practitioners of Agile think about their work. And including those operational elements in the definition of done is a fundamental change to the mindset of the Agile team in the scope and objectives of their work. Another key requirement, which I think is so fundamental we almost shouldn't have to say it, but we'll say it anyway, is to automate testing and deployment. Now, automation of testing should be obvious. Agile, I think most people would accept that automated testing is essential to effective Agile practices. But we can combine it with the ability to automate deployment as well. So take that practice from the operations world and combine it so we have this automation of both testing and deployment. And one of the enablers for this is often cloud technologies. So in many organizations, it may not necessarily be practical to have, for example, a UAT environment that's fully sized to production, where I can do load testing on. But if I can extend into the cloud and use that as an on-demand service, I don't have to actually physically own the hardware. I don't have to have that hardware committed. I can use it for a few hours and then get rid of it. And frequently, automation of deployment is very effective in a cloud environment. Cloud providers provide all the hooks to do automated deployment really, really effectively. So automate not only testing, but the deployment process as well. And when I say automate deployment, I don't mean just the provisioning of the environment. I mean automate both the provisioning of the environment and the configuration of the environment with the actual application. And again, this is where tools like Chef and Puppet come in as very effective tools for making this happen in a scalable, repeatable, and versionable manner. And lastly, monitor applications. So remember that we talked about the benefit of extending the feedback loop from the Agile process to include operational processes, including production operations. Well, monitoring applications in a production environment allows us to give data to provide that information to make good decisions out of that feedback loop. And we should be looking at both functional and non-functional success metrics. What's your metric, what you're monitoring, is very dependent on the nature of the application. But it might be something like, let's say you have a commerce site, a functional metric might be things like, what's your close rate? What's your order volume? How many orders are there per unit time? Whatever it happens to be. Non-functional metrics might be things around availability and response time and kind of whatever other things turn out to be important to you. But any of these things, if they're important to you, if they're important enough to measure, they should be something that you can use to feed back into the process and do continuous improvement on both the software and the environment. And this is the kind of last thing that I'll comment on as the benefit, an illustration of the benefit of doing both Agile and DevOps, where we can think about continuous improvement of software as kind of people have accepted that as one of the benefits of Agile. Well, combining DevOps and Agile allows me to be able to continuously improve not just the software product that I'm developing, which is important, but it's not the whole picture. I can also do continuous improvement on the environment that software product runs in, and therefore its ability to deliver value to the organization and to deliver benefits to its users. So I hope that this has given you a good illustration of why Agile and DevOps, they may seem somewhat different, and certainly different in intent at first, are actually highly complementary and bring some significant benefit when you apply both of them together. And also illustrated some of the challenges and necessary conditions that you need to be able to exploit both of those things effectively together. I'd like to close with just a brief pointer on some of the offerings that WebAge has to support further development of your education and background in these topics. All of this material is available, all of these courses are available through our website, webagesolutions.com. And it's searchable, it's categorized, but I'll leave you with a couple of links that gather some of this material together. So we have a collection of courses under DevOps training, and another collection of courses related to Agile around Agile and Scrum training. And I hope that you'll have a chance to look at those, and hopefully some of you will benefit from some of the course offerings. In summary, just to wrap this up, Agile and DevOps are often seen as distinct approaches to address different challenges of software delivery, one around the software development piece and one around the deployment of those. While they're very different in concept and maybe in concerns, they're actually quite complementary. And applying the two of them together gives you more than just the sum of the parts. If Agile gives you 10 benefits and DevOps gives you 10 benefits, then the two of them together might be, I don't want to guess at a number, 25, 30, 40 benefits, whatever it happens to be. But to realize that beneficial effect, there are some considerations that we've introduced here about how to actually combine these two practices. Now I'll leave you, I'll open the floor for any questions that people has with some contact information. Again, I do thank you all very much for your time and attention. I hope you found it beneficial. If you have a question, please raise your hand or send a chat message. Okay, not getting questions. So hopefully all of you found this beneficial. Again, I do thank you for your time, and please enjoy the rest of your day.